Okay, we will get started. Welcome to our potentially 3-hour-long meeting of the Rural Resilience and Adaptation Subcommittee. I will share my screen with the agenda. Start there. It's good to funky for me. Can you see that? It's hard to tell if it's sharing nowadays. Yes. Okay, good. Yeah. So we will start off with a quick review of the minutes from our last meeting, which was another long one to review all the recommendations. Spend just a few minutes getting grounded. I'm hoping a few more people show up, and I might bring some of what I was planning to talk about at the end up to the beginning, just around messaging and what we want to make sure gets relayed to the Climate Council, because I think we're going to lose people towards the end here. Really, the bulk of our meeting today is to, again, hear from the task leads and the task groups to review what they have lifted up as the priorities to bring forward to the Climate Council, by the end of next week, but presenting on the 16th. But also to, in that, review sort of at a high level all of the recommendations so that we understand what is being brought up for prioritization, but also what isn't, so that we can have a discussion around that, and it's fully informed discussion. We'll take some time for public comment, and then we'll spend some time working together to make sure what we have assembled is indeed what we want to forward to the Climate Council again on the 16th. We'll have a little bit of time for next steps, and then we'll adjourn. So any comments on the agenda? Everybody okay with that format? I'll just point out that we're hoping that the overview from the task leads can be about, 20 minutes, and then we'll have 10 minutes of open discussion from the subcommittee as a whole to kind of reflect on what is being lifted up as the priorities from that task group. So let's review the November 22nd minutes. Where are they? Are you still seeing that? The minutes now? Okay, great. So I will just leave them up for a few minutes and scroll through, and then we'll seek to approve them. So does anybody have any comments on those?
Could you, Andrea, scroll back up and make the display any larger? Good, thank you.
Okay, I'll just scroll in a second.
I'll put the link in the chat so that Alice, you can pull it up on your own screen as well.
great. Thanks, Marion. I'm squinting.
Does anybody need more time? Is there any comments or corrections that anyone saw that need to be made to those?
Reading it now, I thought Jared was at the meeting too.
Is Jared at this meeting? Jared is. Can't confirm one way or another if he was or
He
not.
was at the last meeting, yeah. Oh, wait a minute, I see them. I see him. Never mind, never mind.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Okay. Are we good to approve those minutes then? Thumbs up.
Yes.
Okay. We'll consider those approved. And so, Otis, can you share the presentations you have it?
Yes, yeah, I have the browser open. Just 1 second while I get things situated, but yes. Always have to remind myself how to share screen on
And
Zoom.
I will just say, I want to just appreciate how much work everybody has been doing on this. I know it has been a lot in a really short amount of time. And I know we haven't all gotten to all the aspects that we had hoped we would with the rubric and the prioritization matrix, but I just want to appreciate what effort you have been able to put into this. And I know it's a lot of work to coordinate these meetings with everybody. Thanks, Otis, I'm seeing that now. But here we are. We've got our meeting today, again, to review the prioritized recommendations from the task groups. And then we only have 1 week to turn around. And really, next week's meeting is going to largely be a summary of what is going to go to the Climate Council, because that has to be submitted by the end of the day on Friday. And we will be presenting at the Climate Council. Otis, I don't know if you can make that. I'm not seeing the whole screen, I don't think, like the whole slide. Is it just me or?
Is it still share? What am I sharing now? Did it stop? I am. Okay. Are you seeing it but not in presentation view? Is that what everyone's seeing
Not
right
in
now?
presentation view, and I kind
Yeah.
of hoped it could be, but if it can't be, that's okay.
Yeah, I can try. So that's
It's working for me.
You can see the bottom of the screen?
Yeah,
Yeah, I can see it too.
Huh,
you might just be zoomed in, Andrea, maybe.
I don't even know how to not zoom in. I didn't do anything. Okay, maybe I'll try to put it on a bigger screen and see if it fits there, because it's not showing. Yeah, no, it's not showing and I can't scroll. Okay. All right.
which
Sorry.
are you not seeing the link at the bottom or the
I don't see the bottom of the page. I don't see past December 16th, but that's fine. I'm not zoomed in. I can't figure out why that would be, but if
at
I'm
least
the
on
only
this
one-
page there's not much below that.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, next week will really be kind of an overview, and hopefully we won't have a ton of comments, but if we do, I'm fine with that, and working them into what we provide to the council. We have to get that to them by the end of the day on the 13th. And so they really only have the weekend, and Monday, and most likely just open it when they are presented it on the Monday, on the 16th. So we'll use that meeting. I definitely anticipate the need for another task group meeting and some work to be done in between now and next Friday. We can move, no, let's just hang here for a second. I don't know if Chris is on.
Doesn't look like it.
He made his apologies with a medical appointment this afternoon. At least was
No, I know that, but he said he was going to be having to leave just before 1:30, so I was wondering if he was able to make that. He had some comments, and I wanted to provide some space for him to talk about what goes to the council, and I thought it would be good to talk about a little bit before we go into the presentation, so we can keep it in mind, like what is the story that we want to tell to the council about our work and what we want to raise up as really the focus and the important items to bring forward, and to make sure that people know that this plan is focusing on these things. We've had some discussions at some of our past meetings about sort of how resilience is a little different than mitigation, and is really something we're trying to get our hands around as a state. And I just wanted to provide some space to discuss that before we hear about the prioritizations and what we think is important, sort of as themes or just in a general message for the Climate Council to hear. And we can revisit this at the end, but wanted to kind of just open it up now for that couple-minute conversation here, if people have any thoughts on that. And I guess with that, just caveat the whole presentation today in that we are all working really hard to get this all together. It's a lot. We've received a lot of different guidance from the Climate Action Office on what should be applied and how that should be applied as far as prioritization. So I understand if things have been a little confusing over the past week or two. And the presentation is going to be what the presentation is, but really, again, the main goal is to make sure that we all understand what priorities are being lifted up from the task groups and what might be being left behind, so that we can weigh in on that and see if we agree with the prioritization, or if we feel something that isn't shown in the recommendations be lifted up. So Scott, go ahead, please.
Yeah, my only question is, after it's submitted to the council next week and they review the recommendations and priorities, is there another chance for us to revisit any of these, or are we locked into what we present next week?
That's a really good question. And I think it's something that the Climate Council is going to have to talk about at their meeting. There has been some discussion about who will write the climate action plan, which is, sort of due for draft by mid-March, so that we can go back out for public comment on the draft. And I'm not sure who the writers are going to be. I know that we have put in a lot of work over the last year, and I'm not sure if the subcommittee compositions will stay the same, or what the role of the subcommittees will be in the drafting. So I think that's something that remains to be seen. So for now, it's kind of what is here is what we can expect to be provided for in the plan once the council deliberates on that. I'm sure they will have some questions, or they might have some questions, and we will loop back with the group to answer those. I don't actually know when their next meeting is after the 16th. I haven't kept up on that, but I think they are planning to meet, I want to say they're planning to meet monthly, January, February, March, but I'm not positive about that.
I think they're planning to meet twice a month.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there will be further discussion there, and those meetings will be open, of course. So, okay, Otis, let's move on. So we'll start off with the community capacity and planning, and I'll turn it over to you, Scott.
All right, hello, everybody. I actually wanted to put this slide last. Unfortunately, it's first.
You
So I'm not,
can just go on to the next slide then, when we can
why
come
don't we
back to
go on
this.
to the next one? We'll come back to this.
That's fine.
Okay, I want to describe a little bit the process, and then Marion and Carolyn and I will go through the pathways and strategies. Last month, or this Monday, we started focusing on the prioritization. We got the guidance from both you, Andrea, the PowerPoint thing that was done before, and also from Liz, I think it was a couple days ago, on the newest guidance for prioritization. So we basically put together a spreadsheet in which we could score according to high, medium, and low for each one of the actions. And each person scored them individually. And then we summed up those scores in terms of high, medium, and low, according to the table that was included in the guidance. We also then tried to figure out how to rank I think it's 19, no, it's more than that. It's more than 20 actions that we actually have in our task group. And we tried to quantify what's very much a subjective process for prioritization. So we graded them we numbered each one of these according to high, medium, and low, and then got a preliminary ranking, let's call it, of which actions were actually our priority actions. I want to mention that I think that what we present today is going to what I call preliminary. We continue to have discussions about what the priorities are. And as we discuss it more and more, we find that we readjust our thinking on some of these priorities. So it's a moving target as we move forward. But first, let us tell you what we've come up with so far. And we're going to talk about Pathway 14 and Pathway 18, which is basically tools and housing. So Marion, do you want to start off with 14? And then Carolyn can add on the stuff related to hazard mitigation.
Certainly. Thanks, Scott. Yeah, so I think at our last subcommittee meeting, we shared with you all that we've revised the language for Pathway 14 and looked to combine strategies A and B under that pathway to speak more broadly and sort of more comprehensively to kind of the support and resources needed to develop climate-related plans, implement those, and then implement actions that might result from those plans at a municipal level. We've had a lot of back and forth about how to take the existing actions that were under this particular strategy and then also update them based on feedback we heard at the stakeholder events. Both the municipal event and the business event as well have informed this conversation. And just yesterday sort of landed, as Scott said, on the preliminary set of revised actions that really at a high level speak to the three broad things that we know are needed to help municipalities kind of build resilience to climate change. The first, which you'll see reflected in the first action there, is really around providing the framework and tools for municipalities to integrate climate action and climate resilience work into their municipal planning efforts, whether that be through hazard mitigation planning, through their municipal plans, or other types of plans that they develop. We initially had this focused on sort of one specific project that the Climate Action Office is already leading, but chose to broaden it a bit to be inclusive of the climate planning toolkit and potentially other projects that might help sort of align climate planning, align municipal planning work at a local level with sort of state climate goals and what's outlined in the Climate Action Plan. The second kind of key need that we identified is the funding and technical assistance that's needed to help actually develop those plans. So what's the first action is really around what's needed in climate plans or municipal plans that may have a nexus to climate change. The second action is around, okay, how do we actually provide support through funding and technical assistance to develop those plans? I think there's a clear agreement among our task group that we don't want to develop new programs or new technical assistance providers or work, but rather build and equip the existing programs that are already out there. So as an example, Regional Planning Commission staff help develop local hazard mitigation plans. We want to further equip them to be able to do so. The Municipal Planning Grant Program last legislative session went through a small revision to more comprehensively speak to and support resilience planning as well, but it's an existing program and want to ensure that that's in line with the recommendations from the first action. And then the last one, just at a high level, speaks to kind of the funding that's needed to actually help implement those plans. So what needs to be in the plans? How do we have funding and technical assistance to develop the plans? And then let's actually implement them. And again, through existing programs, primarily through the work of the hazard mitigation folks at BEM. But I don't know, Caroline, if you want to add anything in addition about that last action there.
Yeah, I think that you covered it pretty well. Just adding in for justification where that's coming from for both for all the actions really is that we're seeing a need at the local level for more help, right? More capacity in the realm of planning. Local hazard mitigation plans are an existing plan that they're required to have. And if they don't have a local plan, they're not eligible for hazard mitigation assistance. They have a lower ERAF rate after a disaster, and they're not eligible for helping individuals through the buyout program. So we're seeing a lot of homes, individuals that are not able to get a buyout because their municipality doesn't have a local hazard mitigation plan. And so we're having to rush that through the process. So we want to be supporting local hazard mitigation plans, and one way to do that, the best way probably to do that after our conversation was to support regional planning commissions and doing that work and fully funding them to do that work by matching the federal grants. And so with the last action too, we want to continue the Flood Resilient Communities Fund extension. Also can be referred to as the Community Resilience and up the chat came up, Disaster Mitigation Fund. And that will be both to provide match for hazard mitigation grants from FEMA, but also for other projects that are harder to fund through FEMA that would be highlighted in local hazard mitigation plans or other resilience planning efforts. So things like food security, slow moving hazards like invasive species, those things that are harder to fund, but definitely need to happen to make us more resilient to climate change.
That's it for that one. I don't know if we want to move on. Is Caroline going next or take questions? Maybe we can move on. I think you're up, Caroline.
Yeah, I think go through them all, sorry.
So this one is, the first one is specifically speaking to providing that funding to the regional planning commissions to make that something that they can depend on so they're able to increase their staff capacity. The RPCs provide that planning support for all the municipalities across the state. And they need to have the staff available when they're needed. And they need to be trained, aware of the tools available to them. And so having that sustainable permanent funding is essential to making that happen. And to target funding to those who are supporting frontline communities and using tools that are existing. What used to be called the Municipal Vulnerability Index. And Marian, what is it called now? Sorry.
Can still call it the MVI, keep it short, but indicators tool.
Yes. And that's straight from the State Hazard Mitigation Plan. Another action from the State Hazard Mitigation Plan is to develop an analysis of existing resilience hubs across the state. So this is something that has been reflected in a lot of conversations with the public, with stakeholders, is that this is a need both for understanding resource distribution and also that social resilience element. So where people can go to get the resources that they need, but after a disaster, but also places where we can be building social resilience and helping people understand the resources available to them, where that should be located, what already is out there, and pulling partners together. And we will hopefully be getting funded by FEMA for our first phase of that. And the last one, so this also reflecting stakeholder input. talking about the support the state is providing for those local organizations that are doing a lot of that on the ground work. So AHS is doing a lot of this work, making a lot of progress. This is another action from the state hazard mitigation plan, but to continue to build that local capacity, helping organize, helping that be sustainable and cover the whole state, because right now it's in piecemeal, a little bit confusing and hard to access. So how can we better support those local organizations and make sure they're sustainable? That's it.
Okay, so this is a relatively new series of actions. These came out primarily from the stakeholder meeting with the businesses and reflects two issues that they raised during the meeting. One was access to grants and making sure that grants were available versus loans. And the second thing that came out, in other words, financial assistance. And the second thing that came out was making sure that there was a good coordination network, or a network that businesses could use to respond to disasters or recover from disasters. So we've had a couple of discussions recently about what that means and how to do this. And in the initial cap, the existing cap, what was in there was to do an assessment of the nature-based businesses such as ski resorts, snowmobile associations, maple sugaring, et cetera, and determine what the climate change impacts would be on those industries and businesses. But we've broadened this quite a bit at this point. So strategy 14C is new. It's fully in fund initiatives that foster collaboration, coordination between local economic development, small business support organizations, and local and regional climate planning efforts. And there are 3 new actions under here. Basically, the first one is to essentially do that impact, vulnerability, risk assessment, but not just for the nature-based industries, but for all businesses that could be affected by disasters. The second one is to increase the capacity of networks, basically, in the state to provide businesses with planning, continuity support that is responsive to climate impacts, and assist businesses in applying for funding opportunities, especially related to resilience and/or disaster response. And the third is to expand the BGAP program eligibility to include businesses that experience operational as opposed to direct impacts from climate disasters. I have to say these are relatively new ideas that essentially came up in the last 24 hours. So I wouldn't say that these are locked in at this point, but there are preliminary discussions about how to support businesses in the face of climate change. Okay, next. Okay, so these are Bronwyn's initiatives pretty much, or I mean, we've all discussed them, but Bronwyn's not here today. So I'm gonna try to represent her ideas, or our ideas, I should say. Pathway 18 is related to safe, accessible, energy efficient, and affordable housing. Strategy 18A is basically to update state and local land use governance, regulations, practices, and investments to eliminate barriers to housing development, and also support the creation of additional year-round housing units in line with the state's housing needs assessment. So the first action under here is a revised action. It's expand the pilot program to train a network of local builders in design and building of small and mid-size and accessory dwelling, ADUs essentially. And this rated very high in our assessment, our prioritization yesterday. And a new one is to explore opportunities for resilient residential building codes and resilient zoning, looking at how to improve, well, resilient building codes is one issue, but also resilient zoning, making sure that when at the local level that municipalities are actually zoning appropriate to where disasters may or may not happen. And also coordinate this effort with existing efforts to update and enforce the RBs and CBs as that goes forward. And that's coordination with the cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. Next slide. So again, under pathway 18 for housing, strategy 18B, increase investments in the preservation and development of both private sector, private market and nonprofit-owned affordable housing. This is a revised action, increase funding and financing products for home starts within communities that are planning and investing in development-ready infrastructure, building development partnerships, and updating zoning bylaws to welcome new homes. If Chris does join us, he'll be able to speak to this much more succinctly and in more detail, but it's basically looking at those communities that are already investing in development-ready infrastructure and building also partnerships. Next slide. And this is a new strategy, 18D, develop data sets and analyses on the intersection of climate and housing policy. And there are 3 new proposed actions under here. The first one is actually one that was ranked, not surprisingly, but ranked #1 in all of the 18 to 20 actions that we prioritized, which is to map areas that are suitable for new climate-safe housing and set regional targets for new housing units created. Felt that this was very important in terms of understanding where housing can be placed, how to zone around it, and how to ensure that we have a database to indicate where this is. Second is to create a geolocated searchable housing inventory that includes characteristics relevant to climate action planning, such as risk of flooding, related to the first action there, and also building upon the idea of trying to make sure that we're placing housing in appropriate areas. And the third is, and this is something that Chris has been very strongly advocating for, is a commission to study to identify how many Vermonters have been displaced by floods. And according to Chris, there is not a good inventory or a good understanding of how many people have been actually displaced or unhoused by disasters of Irene and the 2023 and 2024 floods. Okay, and now I think that's the last slide. Yep. No, can you go back to the top priorities for the community capacity one? It's the first slide. So it's before Marion started.
Yeah, 1 second. It'll probably be fastest just to kind of something like this.
Yep. There you go.
Okay. All right. Oh, wait, no.
It's the next one.
There we go.
Okay. Now, I did this overnight based upon our discussions yesterday. I'm not sure that everybody in our task group has actually seen my ranking here. And this is, I would say, very, very preliminary. I think we need to have much more discussion in the task group to decide what would be our 5, because I assume you're looking for something like 5 highest priority actions.
That's right.
But the first one is what Marianne talked about, which is to provide guides and tools such as the climate planning framework and guide and the municipal climate toolkit that help municipalities actually integrate climate change, adaptation, and resilience into municipal planning processes. The second was the one that Carolyn talked about, which is to secure sustainable long-term funding to expand and maintain a permanent flood resilient communities fund. That also could be used to as a local match for federally funded hazard mitigation programs, as well as what we've talked about, which is eligible hazard mitigation activities, non-FEMA. So hazard disasters that don't qualify for FEMA funding. The third is provide funding and technical assistance for the development and implementation of climate resilient municipal funds. So this is related to the first priority, which is actually fund not only the development of these plans, but the implementation of these plans at the municipal level. The fourth is increase funding and financing products for homes within communities that are planning to invest in development-ready infrastructure, building development partnerships, and updating zoning bylaws. And the fifth is to increase funding to the RPCs and local municipalities to support climate and adaptation planning and target funds to those communities that rank high in the MBI. So again, these are things that we talked about yesterday. I'm not sure that all of us would agree that these are our top 5, but this is at least a preliminary presentation of those ideas.
All right, great. Thanks for that.
I think if we're finished unless anybody else from the task group has anything to add.
Yeah, I was just going to provide that opportunity for anybody else to chime in. And then Alice, you've had your hand up for a while.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Just tell me, is okay now?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm probably late recommending this, but among the many things that happen with me is I'm on a floodplain and flood resources listserv, and came across my emails this week, an email from an organization called Planning Information Exchange Webinar. And the title of it was The Role of Community Foundations in Disaster Mitigation. And I'm going to put all this in the chat, links to this group. There will be slides to look at from this presentation, but this all fits with everything that Scott talked about just now in community and planning. And in particular, the focus was on a regional planning program that was done out in Oregon for the types of hazards that they face in a very specific and large regional area. And this is what it focused on, is things that we're talking about, are these best, and should we support our regional planning commissions more in this kind of planning, especially where it is also concerned with where development is a good idea to happen. That along with planning development for housing and multi-use environments, disaster mitigation planning should go right with it. And they focus on a look at what flooding has happened and also an exploratory look at what could happen and to plan development along those lines. I found it an excellent webinar, and it's everything we're talking about. And I'm going to send this information also to my Waitsfield Planning Commission, who are looking at how is downtown Waitsfield or Irisville neighborhood successfully and correctly built for affordable housing and new development. And also paying more attention to disaster mitigation procedures. So it's everything here that we're talking about, and I'll get all the information out to you. I think it's a good support. The end product of this is the sponsor of this was also FEMA, and this is also recognized as FEMA as the future recommended flood risk planning. And FEMA will be having a course on this, complete with materials, etc. And that's upcoming. So I just want to make everybody aware of this because it's an excellent resource for what Scott just presented. And I think it's good for infrastructure planning also.
Great, thanks, Alice. So it does sound like, from what you just said there, it does align quite a lot with what is presented here. So I would venture a guess that you feel like these are good priorities being raised from the community capacity and planning. Otis, can you do me a favor and scroll down to slide 57? I just sort of reframed these a little bit, and I'm keeping the slide for later when we look across what has been presented. But I just wanted to kind of look at this together. That's kind of weird that that's happening, huh?
Yeah, I'm not used to that, but so for now we'll look at it like this.
Okay, that's fine, I guess. I mean, I kind of just took out the keywords from those top 5 priorities and put them this way, and maybe it does a disservice. I'm not sure, because there is some context around them. But I just thought looking at it this way might be valuable in some way. Because when I put it this way, I'm kind of like, so there's planning guides and tools. There's funding for permanent resilience projects, funding and technical assistance for plans, funding and financing for home starts. That seems a little different. Increased funding to RPCs and munis to support planning and targeted funding. I feel like some of those are overlapping, like particularly the 3rd bullet and the last bullet.
Yeah.
So I just want to point that out for further discussion.
I agree. Yeah, we were trying to do some last minute changes there, combining a couple bullets, but there's a couple of things that we'll have to work out there, right? So the important thing is that we feel that it's important that we're establishing there is dependable funding for RPCs to do this work.
Mm-hmm.
And also that we are supporting the ability for RPCs to do plans, particularly in my mind, local hazard mitigation plans on behalf of the community, so that our small communities don't have to deal with all of the administrative burden of going out to bid, et cetera. And RPCs can provide those plans because they're really good plans. So
I know sometimes when you start lumping a bunch of actions together, it becomes a strategy. So yeah.
I
Go
think,
ahead, Marianne.
well, I was just gonna, like, this is a helpful way to look at it. I guess I'm curious, are you proposing revising the actions to say this? Like,
No, because I copied this right from the actions that you provided.
yeah, but you, like what you said about sort of taking out some of the context.
Well, I guess I raise it because if and it'll all kind of depend on how this is used in the final climate action plan, really. But if we're talking about like the top 15, and some of these are sort of the same, do we want to raise something else up too? Like combine some of these and maybe make some room for something else?
Yeah, I think the way that you sort of,
it's the tools, it's the physical assistance, and then yeah, I don't know exactly what the categories are, but
No, I think you're right, but it's tools and frameworks. It's technical assistance and it's funding, and the comments we got from the stakeholder groups were, especially from some of the RPC members who participated, is not just funding for planning, but funding for implementation. So, and the other comment that we've talked back and forth about is making sure that we're not burdening municipalities with more, but building these tools into existing requirements at a municipal level. So municipal plans, hazard mitigation plans, et cetera, are providing the tools that people can use to actually integrate climate change resilience and adaptation. And again, I'm speaking now again from my other hat, which is as a planning commissioner member, and we just had a planning commission meeting last night. And we talked around and around about what our next comprehensive plan is going to look like, and how do we integrate our vision and strategy, and how do we integrate a master plan that's being developed, and how does that take into account climate change and climate change impacts. So to us at a municipal level, these are important, 3 important things that we need.
yeah, definitely. Totally understand that. And then just as a larger conversation, and we had this conversation at the cross-sector mitigation meeting yesterday too, because funding is going to be, we're going to see funding in so many of these because we need it in so many different aspects. We need it for planning. We need it for state staff to carry out programs. We just need it to get it out to do planning and to do projects and implement the plans. Maybe if we have time later, we can talk a little bit about ideas for that. And because we did hear a lot about providing grants and not financing, or if it is financing, it might as well be a grant. You can call it whatever you want, but like they need the money up front. So just thinking more broadly, and maybe this is something that is a message that's carried forward to the Climate Council, because I think it's going to come up with probably every subcommittee. we need funding, but we need to think of a new way of getting that funding. And so anyway, just to put a plug in for that. Go ahead, Alice. We got to wrap this conversation up in the next couple of minutes. So if you could be brief with your
Yeah,
comments,
sure.
that'd be great.
There is funding available for completing local hazard mitigation plans. Carolyn, who's going to speak next, and I are very familiar with getting the Waitsfield plan done. Now, in terms of this webinar I told you about, this is discussed. Local hazard mitigation plans are integral to the planning process.
Okay.
What the regional planning commissions are going to need is they're going to need funding, they're going to need staffing, and they're going to need the power the state statutes created that allow them to do what we're asking.
Thank you. Okay, Caroline, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to, similar to what Al said, just point out, right, that there is the funding available for local hazard mitigation plans. We can increase the accessibility of that funding by providing the match. And so kind of the theme is, taking advantage of the federal funding that we can bring into the state, making sure that we're recognizing existing programs, and working to build off of those programs, organizations, and building off of those. So, yeah, I know time is limited, so.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, let's move on to the infrastructure and built environment. Otis, if we can pop back up to those slides.
Similar to the community group, can we start with not this slide? We'll start with the overview, and then we'll go to top priorities. Okay, so what we've got about 18-ish remaining action items that we've worked through. We haven't created any new ones. We've mostly revised, consolidated, and eliminated duplicative actions, and also combine 4 strategies into 2, one focused on sort of the planning, pre-assessment work, and the second strategy, which will be strategy 15B on a later slide, is more on the invest, implement, do. So our strategies are focused, and our actions are focused on really assets, the utility assets, transportation assets, and water, wastewater assets. We can go through the ones. Oh, let me talk about what we're leaving behind. The ones that didn't really make it forward. Well, actually, never mind. I'll talk about that when we go to the priority slide. Let's dive into these. These are under Pathway 15, Strategy 15A. Pathway 15 is about proactively and strategically investing to enhance resilience across those different asset types I talked about, including communications. And the red is a recent addition, which is to focus on equity and make sure any investments, program assessments are going to benefit Vermont's most vulnerable residents to help ensure that burdens and benefits are equally distributed. That's sort of our EJ lens that we popped into the pathway. And then again, strategy 15A is this planning assessment strategy. And we'll go through the action items that remain under this strategy. The first one is a revision. Local and regional planners, utilities, transportation providers, and state agencies should collaborate to identify mission critical facilities and develop preparedness, survivability, and recovery plans, procedures, and investments that mitigate the impact of extreme weather events to services provided by these facilities. So this is an action to mission critical facilities, a little bit different, I think, as Anne noted in the chat, from the resilience hubs, but there could be overlap dependent on how resilience hubs are defined, or whether a resilience hub is a municipal is a municipal facility. I would invite anyone from the task group to jump in with additional information if you want. So I'll just pause after I go through each of these if anyone else wants to jump in with more context. Okay, I will move on to the second one, which is an assessment, assessing the vulnerability of drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater infrastructure assets, and prioritizing opportunities to address these vulnerabilities, including the relocation of systems. This is probably the area where we did the most consolidation, is in the water, wastewater, stormwater action. Andrea really took the lead on consolidating, and then we got feedback from DEC on prioritizing and understanding what could remain and what could be consolidated or removed or was already occurring. The next one is supporting the development and implementation of asset management programs for all public water systems and publicly owned wastewater treatment works. And so this is implementation. Actually, this one should go under 15B. What do you all think about that one, since this is an implementation one? I didn't catch that last night.
This is something we've struggled with. We're really trying to bucket all of our actions into two groups: planning and assessment, and then the doing or investment. So I think depending on how you read this one, you could look at it, I think, as you know, a program of planning and or a program of investment. So we might need to just refine it a little bit more, talk here about, or talk with DEC where these originated. Is an asset management program. It's a little bit of both. So it kind of straddles both worlds, but we should just decide where to put it.
We can flag this one. Okay. Any questions on these before we move on? Then we can go to the next slide, which is the other strategy, the doing strategy, strategy 15B, increasing the resilience of critical infrastructure to severe weather and other climate change threats by improving system efficiency, reliability, and redundancies, especially at critical facilities. As you can see from the column on the right, these are implementation and investment focused. The first one is utilities should deploy technology for management, control, and optimization of distributed energy resources, including energy storage, to improve reliability and resilience while reducing costs for all customers. So this one's about both reliability and resilience. And then we have another action on ensuring benefits and costs are equitably distributed and don't fall entirely on ratepayers where costs exceed benefits. Okay. Increasing investment to municipalities for new and expanded facilities to support water and wastewater system performance efficiencies. And what we've added to, oh no, this is correct. There we go. I've got a question for the group. So when Scott was talking about prioritizing home starts in areas where there's development ready infrastructure, I started thinking about this particular water wastewater action and thinking about, does this read as we need investment for new facilities, let's say in a village center that just has septic? Or is this about increasing efficiency at any new or expanded facility? And if the latter, do we need a strategy around supporting investment in new facilities? Caroline?
I don't know if I'm answering your question, but when you're going through these, I think what you're asking is about, or maybe not, it's about supporting the communities and accessing this, right? So when I think that maybe our group needs to have some sort of action where we're specifically speaking to increasing the ability for municipalities to take advantage of these programs, right? Because we can create all the new programs that we want, but if folks don't know they exist or don't know how to access them, it's not going to go anywhere. But I guess that's for my group to discuss a little bit more.
Yeah. So you're thinking about increasing access, and I'm wondering if this second action provides that investment, that action for a new facility, or is this about performance efficiency improvement specifically?
The way it reads to
Um,
me is it's about performance efficiency, but that's just from reading what's on the screen.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both because it was a matter of like making the systems more efficient by reducing what goes into them. So it was about source protection areas. It was about like stormwater treatment systems that sort of slow things down, and so that they had greater capacity. And it was also about moving them if needed.
Okay, that's the way I read it too, but Scott's earlier slide and that action about development ready infrastructure made me wonder, are any of our action items speaking to supporting investment, pre-feasibility to construction kind of investment in new facilities? If we're thinking about concentrated development in village centers, for example, we're going to need
Yeah.
these municipal facilities.
I think that's a really good
So
discussion
just
to have overall
something to
when we, a little later, for sure.
take away. Okay. All right, sorry for that sidebar. The next one we have is developing and funding programs to deploy solar and storage at water and wastewater facilities to ensure continuity of operation during events, power outage events. So this is a resilience play. Anne?
Yeah, and this is just something for us to discuss next week, I think, but Andrew and I had a conversation with Neil where we actually reworded this to be more technology agnostic, and I don't think that carried through here, that revision. So I think we have a revision here that's more like develop and fund programs to ensure continuity of operations during events, for example, we need to refine this one.
Okay. Thanks, Anne. I heard you say that last week, but I didn't see it written down anywhere, so I wasn't sure if I
Yeah.
misheard.
We've just
Okay. We just need
too
to
many
remember to make that change.
too many emails flying around, yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to double check. These are not I see you have one more slide. These are not necessarily the ones that we talked about ranking as high. Like this one, DEC had ranked as the lowest priority. So I don't know if there's a lot more slides here, or I just haven't seen the ones we said as high.
There's the priority slide. So
Okay,
if
thanks.
we can jump to slide 49 unless there are any questions on these. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So
Yeah, I
on,
might be a little lost too. So are any of these ones on this slide repetitive of what was in the other ones, or are those all different? Is this slide the one that was sort of the leftovers, the ones that aren't prioritized?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now we'll go
And
to
then,
priorities.
so slide, what is it? 49 is our top 5. And so apologies for this, I did this late last night. We also have the word table. And in the word table is more comprehensive. And for example, last night we received from Neil at DEC all the water, wastewater, stormwater actions ranked. I've numbered those in the Word document, moved the top one over to this top priority, but I think as a task group, we have to see how his top 6 integrate with our already defined top 5. If that makes sense. So what the task group yesterday, and we didn't do it as systematically as the community's task group. We just ranked the top 5 as top highest under both our strategy 15A, our planning and assessing, and 15B, sorry, not 15D, the doing, implementation, investment strategy. So The first one that we ranked high is improving this municipal vulnerability index so that it functions more as an index that can be used to prioritize infrastructure investments across the state and to ensure that it includes currently missing data on historic utility outage data and ANR's environmental justice mapping tool, which I understand is already being worked on, being integrated into this MVI. And then this MVI could be used as a way to prioritize action and investment.
No.
And
I just want to make sure that as we move forward, or if we move forward with this one, that we have the right understanding of what the index was supposed to be and what it is now and what it could be. My understanding is sort of what came out from ERG is useful if you are a community and you are looking at your specific vulnerabilities and you can see where you are, you know, in various indices. But it's not necessarily usable by, say, a state agency to prioritize investments in, say, the top 10 communities based on 5 indicators to, you know, spit out, give me the top 5 that have the highest index for various vulnerabilities. And I just want to make sure that that's correct understanding where we are now, and that this is the right wording to get us to that index. Marion. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a look at the language and revise it further, and don't have to do it right now if that's helpful. But generally, Anne, you're correct. I think that was a shift that we made early on in the project, was shifting away from an index to really having it be an indicator, a tool that helps municipalities kind of conduct their own vulnerability assessments. So I think I was going to put in the chat, but I mean, it's no longer called an index. So I think you'd have to change the action language, not to say improve the municipal vulnerability index, but rather you could, you know, use the municipal vulnerability indicators tool as a starting point to create an index, or some other language in that space. But we'd have to, you know, you're not starting from an index. We'd have to be creating a new index. And I think happy to talk in more detail about it. I think some of the questions really had, and this was kind of wrapped up in the ultimate audience and use of the tool, but an index for all climate hazards or based on which climate hazards, I think that's when it starts to get really complicated and thinking, and gets to some questions around sort of costs and real usability of it based on hazards we might identify and really what you're trying to assess. So maybe that's something that's figured out, you know, after the action is drafted. But I think at least changing the beginning language, so it's kind of talking about an index as a new tool that could be built off of the MVI currently, but know that there's some other interest in work from folks at BEM and others to think about this as well. So yeah, I think could be some changes just in the action language.
okay, thank you both. Our second action is electric infrastructure focus. The state through the PUC and the Public Service Department should investigate resilience planning, including defining, valuing, measuring, and setting targets for grid resilience. Utilities should integrate resilience planning into their integrated resource plans based on guidance resulting from this proceeding. Okay, those are 2 top ones under 15A. Under 15B, excuse the typo, the plan, the doing, investing, implementing. We've got 3 under here.
You know, one comment.
Go for it.
I think next week we should talk about just adding a little bit more action into these. Like I think about V-Trans and their things that they're already doing, and utilities and things that they're already doing. And, you know, these to me right now are all reading about studying and planning still. And maybe there's another slide that talks about actions, but a little more action oriented things that we can do right now, or that we are doing right now.
We can do that. These next 3 are hopefully a little
Sorry
more
to throw a wrench,
action oriented. No, I
yeah.
think as we've all been saying, we've kind of all doing this last minute, and another set of eyes is needed. Yes, Alice.
Make sure I'm unmuted. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Michael from Green Mountain Power, I'm also wondering if what ought to get sprinkled into here is some attention to some of the new Public Utility Commission requirements under Act 248 and Act 248A for net zero, the new net zero credits. The new way to get net zero credits is only if the power is used on the particular parcel where the solar array is installed or the parcel next to it. And it used to be like, for example, we have a solar array here in Waitsfield that is used by the high school and middle school in Duxbury. Those kind of installations for net zero credits will all be grandfathered, but new ones will not get net zero funding if they are not using it on their parcel or next to it. There are other credits that they can go for in those types of installations. And it seems that that was just because I think net zero credits got quite expensive. And the other one is for siting in source protection areas. That will require an A&R permit, especially because those usually refer to groundwater and water sources for village, town and village water sources and access to flow to streams. This is just something that I've learned in a seminar this week.
Yeah, I'd probably have to let Ann speak to the credits and the 248. I'm interested in infrastructure to keep the lights on. I also am interested in renewable energy, but Ann, do you have information on that? I don't. I could find it.
I think, Alice, you're referring to the changes in Act 179 to the renewable energy standard, which now requires all the Vermont utilities provide 100% renewable electricity to their customers by 2030 or 2032, depending on the dates. And
it's part of it.
The offset for the increased cost of providing everyone with renewable electricity by those dates was to reduce the cost of the net metering program. And that was by restricting virtual group net metering. And so now, except for affordable housing providers, there has to be a nexus with the parcel for new systems going forward. I would invite everyone, though, to look at a report that the department has forthcoming. We were required to engage with a bunch of stakeholders and come out with a report on sort of a replacement for group net metering with a focus on affordable housing communities and other types of manufactured home communities and even other types of community considerations. So that's going to be coming out within a few days here for everyone to look at, and may, speak to some of the community types of concerns. But I would also caution that that's sort of on the mitigation side of things as opposed to the resilience and adaptation or infrastructure side of things. And obviously there's crossover, but we're trying to, I think, right here, stay in our infrastructure and resilience and adaptation zone.
Thanks, Ann.
Yeah. I'm wondering, Otis, if you can again scroll down to slide 57, because I tried to do the same thing for this group that I did for the first group. A little bit more challenging for me to do that, I felt like. But when I did it, I'm thinking, is bullet number 3, or could bullet number 3 be addressed through what is being talked about in bullet number 1? Because it talks about sort of everybody, locals and utilities and everybody collaborating. Collaborating to me is a little squishy too, as an action, but am just wondering of the potential overlap in those two, if one could be addressed with the other. I also wonder about the fifth bullet, having asset management programs, if that should be applied across infrastructure, not just related to public water systems and publicly owned wastewater treatment works, and how that gets into maybe what we're talking about in bullet 2 for utilities. Because there's asset management programs, and then there's like, okay, so you have an asset management, like what is the program? Is it just an inventory, or is it like it's replacements, it's a whole bunch of different things, but it, you know, we should incorporate resilience or vulnerability assessments into that. And is that the same in bullet 5 or similar in bullet 2 and 5, just for different infrastructure?
I think those are good points, and I definitely have thoughts. I don't want to hold us up here, and we could park them till next week, but I think there are ways we could merge, but we might lose some of the important nuance of calling out specific sectors.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else on infrastructure and built environment that anybody wants to add in now?
I will just add that the actions that didn't rise to the top were really actions that were already ongoing. Like we have an action that like utilities should conduct benefit cost analyses on resilience upgrades. That's work that's already ongoing. And then this sounds like we're rewording it anyway, but we didn't lift up deploying solar and storage at wastewater treatment plants because it was very specific, directed to solar and storage. So that did not currently get lifted up in its current state.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Scott.
I have a question also about bullet number 3, collaborate to ID critical facilities. And I'm wondering who's responsible for that, and how does that relate to individual municipalities' emergency response plans or emergency management plans?
So what the full action says is local and regional planners, utilities, transportation providers, and state agencies should collaborate to identify mission critical. And that's why I was asking, how does that overlap with the MVI indicator? Because it seems like if all those things are going to be fed in, is that the collaboration, or is it different? And is it a different use of the tool, like Anne was kind of talking about earlier too?
I saw a lot of similarities there too. I think that they're like different phases of a project. But right, it's part of the assessment would have to be IDing an idea of critical facilities and defining what that is.
I don't know that we'll answer that right now, but I appreciate, Scott, you asking the question, and Caroline, you're weighing in, and I think something we can ponder a bit more when we meet as a task group again next week. Because if those questions are coming up now, it's good to address them to avoid any confusion. I want to take a little bit of a pivot because Chris, I think you're still here for a few more minutes. Is that right or not? Has he gone now again? You're here. And I just wanted to provide some space for you. You mentioned this at our last meeting. You just put it in the chat as your role as a counselor. And we talked a little bit about it at the beginning about what sort of overarching messages or themes that we want to bring to the council. And so maybe we just take another couple minutes to revisit that before you have to leave. Thanks.
Sure. Do you want me to explain it briefly, Andrea?
Yes, please.
So I'm just, I've come into this kind of late. You guys have been working on all this longer than I have since I've rejoined the council and come onto this subcommittee. But it just occurs to me, just the sheer volume of actions and strategies and tasks that we're asked to review and consider is immense and of incredible importance. And it's not a light lift. And it feels to me, and this is just my opinion, but if it feels to me that if this committee feels like it needs more time, if it needs a different approach, if it needs something, anything different that it wants to communicate to the steering committee or the council to really address rural resilience and adaptation, that we ask for that, and not only ask for it, I think inform and to some extent even tell, because and we don't, this does not have to delay the schedule for the climate action plan. It's really common when we do regional plans, town plans, if you need to do a deeper dive or approach something differently, to actually flag that in the plan and say, hey, we need to do further development of these issues or this, or create another. I'm not talking about creating a whole other plan, but basically, you know, like an example could be in doing a town plan, looking at like an open space plan, or calling out, hey, we need to do a more robust revisiting of our local hazard mitigation plan, and then you do that work. So I just feel, I just hope this subcommittee feels like it doesn't need to ask for permission to request what it needs from the larger council and from the steering committee. And that if we need to take time to do that, that we give ourselves that time to do it. We can do this task that we're working on right now as best we can. It's not a either or proposition. And one last thing I'll mention, I mean, obviously we've had thousands of Vermonters and a number of our communities go through severe catastrophic flooding, wind events, snow events over the last few years since the cap was enacted. And a lot of what we've discussed is fairly high level action. I don't know that we've really had the opportunity or capacity, or even the timing, is whether or not the timing is even right, to engage with these traumatized communities about very real world, leading edge climate related damages and very immediate term, near and long term adaptation resilience needs. And it feels like, you know, one of the items we need to be thinking about is how do we do that? Because there really hasn't been like a full-fledged, you know, statewide report or accounting of how many homes have been lost, how many people have been displaced, how many homes are permanently lost. Where do people go? What does this mean for future land use planning? How do we start, you know, creating that the infrastructure investment and other things to move communities up and away? So there's that whole other element to this too, the very real world, immediate, near, and long term stuff that this committee's, you know, really is on our wheelhouse. I hate that term, but I use it anyway. But anyway, that's
Chris,
what
I think that's,
wanted to offer that.
yeah, I thank you for bringing that up, and those are the types of things that I wanted to talk about, because yeah, what are the actions? Do we have some actions for the Climate Council to consider as they move forward with writing this? Like, and do we put those into our recommendations, or do we just kind of talk about that when we give our presentation? I would love to hear from other people about thoughts on that. And I'll put it as an agenda item for our last meeting as well, because I'm pretty sure I'll be working on that presentation over the weekend rather than or talking points anyway. So I think we can spend some time thinking about it. If you have something to contribute now, please do. But if not, then we can revisit this next week when we talk again and think about those sort of overarching messages and additional work that needs to be done to write this climate action plan.
If you don't feel it's necessary, I mean, is there a nod of heads or thumbs up or anything like, hey, yeah, this is needed, or nope, we're good to go, let's just keep rolling and don't worry about it?
Like one specific thing I can think of, and maybe it's already going to be done, but I think it would be like you just talking about those traumatized communities. There's been work, obviously there's people working very closely with these communities. And we did have our public inputs, but like storytelling, real storytelling of like what that means to a community and the individuals in it. So I think that would be like sort of a pointed consideration for the council to take forward as they draft the climate action plan. But Scott, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, Fritz raised this the other day with us as well. And as I mentioned before, I feel a little bit pressured from time to time with trying to assimilate all the information that's flowing around. And part of it's timing of information that we get, but also just the information that we had from the stakeholder groups. I mean, there's just enormous amount of information. And to go through that and document it all, not only in my own mind, but in our task group. So this is why I asked the question before, that if we submit something to the council by the 16th, and those are recommendations, prioritizations, do we have an opportunity to revisit that at some point in time? And I'm not sure that I'm asking that we delay things. I'm just wondering whether or not there's an opportunity to revise things as we move forward. And that to me would be at least one option.
Yep. Yeah. And like I said, I really don't know what the outlook for our subcommittees is after this deliverable. But go ahead, Marion.
Well, just two quick things. Andrea, you talking about storytelling reminded me, I think there is an intent to weave stories through the climate action plan. I don't know if that was what you were speaking about, or if you were thinking about kind of interviewing and having stories actually inform the development of actions.
Yeah, maybe both.
Okay, so two different things then. So I think the former, like the first kind of example, there is an intent to kind of weave stories throughout the climate action plan, and really in presenting the actions, presented in a way that's more digestible and more connected to those stories. I don't have more info than that, but I think Sophie with the Climate Action Office is thinking about that, and we'll be working on that once the kind of plan moves over to the council. So just something to keep in mind. And I think if there's an ask from the subcommittee about being able to inform those stories, or think about how to use those to inform edits to actions, before the July 1st deadline, I think that's something that we could ask about. I think generally, yeah, I mean, to Chris's point, like to what Scott said, we met this week and worked through some prioritization of actions. I think we haven't done great due diligence and sort of applying the equity and scoring rubric process. I think we've thought about it conceptually, but we haven't talked about it in detail for each action. So certainly in that space, I think there's more time would be better to allow us to do that. But I think, Chris, to your point, if we were to ask kind of for more time to pursue particular actions in more detail, or to do more engagement with vulnerable or impacted populations, are we as a subcommittee asking for that? Or are we asking the council to do that? I kind of, just knowing that, so many folks are doing this kind of with their volunteer time, I wonder about kind of capacity to carry on and do this additional work. I guess looking for a little more detail on, like, well, let's be clear about what we're actually asking for and time to do. I think if it's time to use the guiding principles and incorporate that into the actions that we've drafted, that makes sense to me. But if it's to do like a deep dive into a particular topic, I would pose the question back about, do we have the capacity and want to take that on?
And just my brief answer before I have to leave. Sorry, everybody. This is a long scheduled medical appointment. They're hard, almost impossible to get. I think we also need to give ourselves the time to figure that out. So if we need to take the time to figure out exactly what the ask is, taking into account our capacity, the volunteer capacity, what this would look like, I think that's part of what we'd want to inform the steering committee about and the council about, like, hey, we want to take a little bit, we want to take some subcommittee time apart from the prioritization and ranking and all the other stuff that we're doing, to really talk about what do we really need in this space to do what we've been asked to do, especially since, it's just a huge percentage of the Vermont population and landscape that we're trying to talk about here. I think that's totally legit. So I guess the response, Marion, is, yeah, we need to do that, and we need to give ourselves the time to do that, and within the capacity of the subcommittee to do it. I have to hop off, get my mom to the doctor. Thank y'all.
Sorry, barking dog. Liz, go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought it might be helpful to share out what's on the docket for the steering committee, because maybe that could be a place to raise some of these questions potentially. There's gonna be, I'm not sure if folks remember, but there was kind of like a month by month or a couple month by month timeline for subcommittees and kind of outline responsibilities and goals. And so in terms of just not knowing what's next for subcommittees, we're going to be on the docket for the agenda for the steering committee is the development of the next 6 months for the climate action plan. So that might be helpful. And then also there will be a chart for drafting, like updating the table of contents and drafting responsibilities. So I just wanted to flag that in case that's helpful for the subcommittee to know.
Right. Yes, and there has been some input provided to that chart of responsible writers for specific sections, but again, I think that is going to be, I don't know if the agenda has been completely developed for the December 16th meeting, but I anticipate there being some discussion about next steps.
Yeah, that's on the steering committee agenda too, is the agenda for the 16th.
Thank you. Okay, let's jump into the last task group. Sorry for getting a little bit off the time frame there, but jump back in. Otis, if you can share again, that would be super.
Could you put up the top priorities slide first?
This one? Wait.
No, that one, yeah.
Yeah. Can you get rid of the comments there, please?
Okay, so first let me say I'm in Chris Campany's boat too, with doctor's appointments and physical therapy and some pain mixing into working on this project this week. We did have a public health task group meeting, which Jared Ulmer chaired for us. I was not there, so Jared, Ben, Rose, and Dr. Levine were the attendees, and they did a great job of trying to sort out what our priorities are and how best in public health can support. If you look at what our pathway is, equitable adaptation to the public health impacts of climate change. I mean, that's really come up as our mission and our mantra. So Andrea has put back in our original slides of, I think it was November 22nd. And then I created 3 slides that look weird because I'm not proficient in PowerPoint. And I think the Mac keyboard didn't like Microsoft PowerPoint. And silly me, I thought cut and paste would work. But let's talk about these first. What I did, because we're all busy, is
sorry, Alice. I took those slides away. They're still here. We need to reference them, but what's going to be shown here is what you put in. So it has this sort of summary and then the detail of the actions related to each of these.
Okay, perfect. But I am going to address them. The Public Health Task Force and what we're doing in public health is brand new into the Climate Action Plan and what needs to go in. And so it's everything status you'll see is new. And if you going back to the old slides, we looked at them and we said, well, if you really look at it, what's really the issue here is we have one pathway. We don't have multiple pathways. So the rest of our discussions have been on strategies and actions. And in the original slides, that's what you have. One pathway for, I think it was 4 or 5 strategies and actions under those, all of which were either the 3 most important we felt for each strategy. I think one had 4. So to be able to say, okay, are we looking at the priorities again? We went back to that and pulled out another top 3. One thing that could also have to happen to our original slides, and you'll notice this in the list here is we picked the top 3 strategies being 19B, 19C, and 19D. And we took out A, although we'd like to give it kind of an honorable mention. So now you can go down to one of the sticky slides I created, if you would. Yeah. So this is the first one. If we look at pathway 19, we're talking about increasing support for individuals and households to prepare and adapt to the climate impacts on health. So we're looking here for planning tools and funding in regards to the theme. And the most important action we picked from the ones under this was to provide funding to support climate resilience for households that need extra assistance, which may include trees and other vegetative shade, windows treatments for shade, air conditioning, fans, air purifiers, mechanical ventilation, for example, things to prevent moisture intrusion, and management, backup power, window screens, private drinking water testing and treatment. Now, why window screens? Well, that's going to address what happens in the summer with the vector-borne illnesses from insects, etc. I know I have screens that have to get fixed, and I get bit by a mosquito every night in my house. We're also looking here at number of these tools also apply to warming and making houses less drafty in the winter. We have programs that I know that are called window dressing, especially here in the valley, where frames are made for windows to make them less drafty for people that need them. So that's one that we felt was the most important to deliver strategy 19B. Can we go to the next one? Okay, so from here, we talked about increased support for regional, municipal, and community partners to mitigate, prepare, and respond to climate impacts on health. And we merged a couple of actions in here, and you can tell by the bullets. We're looking to explore and implement strategies to enhance local emergency preparedness and response capacity, expand funding and the authority, like I've spoken about regional planning commissions and or county government, increase direct funding, training, and technical assistance to municipalities. And we've talked very much about how public health needs to be reaching the municipalities and reaching out to all local residents. And how that can best happen is to get it down to the municipal level. For example, if you think about it, if somebody wanted to know where a cooling center was, or where can I get, what's the latest on EEE, the thing that's going to happen is they're going to pick up the phone and call the select board, the town offices, and they'll get Jennifer Peterson in Waitsfield, who actually is quite versed in telling them where they can find that information. And then we started talking about, we really support the idea of the community hubs, and that the community hubs can be centers of sharing service places for learning, collaboration, resources, and refuge in response to climate-related hazards and other community needs. And these hubs can also serve as warming and cooling centers. Okay, and then the last slide, please. Okay. And the last one is talking about expanding state capacity to plan, prepare, and respond to the climate-related health hazards, to the public health impacts on climate change. And we're looking at, we again here put in 2 actions from under that strategy, which was to identify and address gaps in state contracted community mental health services for individuals and communities to address anxiety, depression, distress, and trauma caused by climate change and climate-related disasters, and increase the staff capacity to plan, state staff capacity to plan, prepare, and respond to climate-related health hazards, including support for regional, municipal, and community partners. And I completed these slides from notes that were given to me, written up very great by Jared Ulmer when he took notes for the Public Health Task Force. And what we're looking at here is they had I keep calling it task force, Public Health Task Group, to what were the actions we felt were the best ways to deliver what we felt needed. And they all are under planning, assessment, funding, investment, etc. There's one other priority that I've been thinking about a lot about, and it's on the Just Transitions. Danielle Bombardier had gone through our slides for us, and we had a reference in our slides on health equity. And I think that really goes directly up to the pathway to understand what our pathway means. And the idea is I would like to have something, and I just couldn't figure out where to put it last night, something on health equity. The Department of Public Health, and Dr. Levine sent it to us, has a definition of what health equity is. And he did send it to us. And I think it needs to go somewhere. I think it's overall what we're trying to do with everything we're talking about in this, the 3 task groups and the full climate action plan. And this is the definition. Health equity exists when all people have a fair and just opportunity to be healthy, especially those who have experienced socioeconomic disadvantage, historical injustice, and other avoidable systemic inequalities that are often associated with social categories of race, gender, ethnicity, social position, and sex. So what I'd like to do is, I did ask Jared to help with this and to, where am I here? Pipe in on what it is that he gleaned from the task force group meeting that I was not at, and what was in his notes, and he had some additional things to put in wordsmithing that I wasn't quite sure where to put, but also I've asked Ben, Rose, and Dr. Levine to chirp in as they wish also. Jared, anything from you? There he is.
Delayed reaction on my computer. No, thanks, Alice. I think you covered things really well, especially what we discussed on Wednesday. I think the only things I might add are, in terms of our 3 strategies, the one that we sort of deprioritized to some extent was about outreach, education, and emergency communications. And I think we all acknowledge that those were really important actions, but that we're already working on those to varying degrees. So they didn't seem as critical for asking for new things to happen or new resources. But it felt important to state that those are critical. That's a critical strategy. We need to continue that work. The other strategies that we talked about were sort of about 3 different points of intervention. One being B being more focused on individuals and households, C being more focused on communities, and D being more focused on the state. And I think from our conversation, the community focus probably resonated the most as being where we want to focus support. And I think that aligns with, you know, some of the other recommendations from the conversation today. So I think the ones that were also in there that we didn't discuss were about support for non-governmental partners, and, you know, particularly for partners and communities that run facilities where disproportionately affected populations are served, you know, such as homeless shelters or long-term care facilities, for example, making sure that those types of facilities are supported. So I think we did try to address health equity throughout. I think there are other ways that it would be nice to address that through our sort of introduction narrative to this whole section, but in terms of outreach and in terms of some of the individual level strategies, you know, we did try to identify specific population groups that the strategies should be focused on. I think the one other strategy we didn't really talk about was support for identifying people at highest risk and developing the systems to serve them in advance and during emergencies. That's sort of what the CARE Citizens Assistance Registry for Emergencies does to some extent, but we know that communities have different approaches to that and different levels of participation in that. So wanting to just think of how either, you know, state or local models could be used to better identify people that need extra assistance during a disaster and provide that support. I think that kind of covers it. I don't know if Dr. Levine or Ben want to add anything more from our discussion on Wednesday.
Jared, this has been, I think you did a good job of putting a finer point on the refinements we made on Wednesday, and I think we can probably provide a final tweaked version of our prioritized actions to Andrea.
Yeah, I agree. I have nothing to add. It's been very comprehensive.
There's one thing I do want to add, because this came up. I was able to attend part of the education subcommittee meeting, and one thing that came up that I found interesting is from members of the Department of Education. I found out two things: having better climate change curricula in the schools, and how best to try and get those in. It's you don't want to burden overwhelmed curricula and teachers right now, but there is a way to maybe do this with local community groups that could come in and supplement. And the other one was having public health information reaching the schools, whether it's through the administration or through the full Department of Education, but that was also mentioned as something that should happen. We've
So
had a
any
lot of bubbles.
questions or comments from other subcommittee members? So Otis, do you
A
want
lot
to
of it comes down to funding.
all right, let's go down to slide 57 again. Oh, you're on it. There, you're on it. Same sort of summary here. And there is definitely funding on that first one. I don't see funding in the other one, so maybe just think about that as we finalize the language there. Those were the four that I captured from your slides. Those 4 bullets, but then there was considerable discussion on how to wrap in health equity, the identification of, I don't know if it was vulnerable, Jared, the term that you used, individuals, and then education piece. And so I thought I'd just write those down too, to see what people thought about including those as another priority, or just generally our thoughts on those 4 bullets.
I think we can kind of edit up some of the first bullets in there and have room for the, statements on health equity and education there without making a really long green box.
It may be me, Andrea, but I find that these summarized bullets are at such a high level of abstraction that I can't get my head around them. I feel like we've boiled off too much of the context to understand what our actions actually are.
So I did pass around also all the actions, so that people were aware of what was not included in the prioritizations. We have to come up with a way to decide if these are the top, 10 to 15 that we want to bring to the council. And that's what we'll spend time doing after a break and after some public comment, which is the next things on our list. I think there's, people work in different ways. If you have a better way of showing these 15 to 20 actions, so that we can deliberate on them all together, that is where we're going to be going in the rest of this meeting. So I welcome some way to do that. But anyway, any other comments? Public health. Go ahead, Jared.
I'm trying to do my best rephrasing of Ben's comment, because I think this has come up in some of our conversations. I think Ben was meaning that it's not so much the selection of the strategies, but the word, or of the actions, but the wording of them here, that the specific actionable request may have been watered down in an attempt at brevity, and that's super challenging to retain that here. But maybe that's something that we can think about in our different groups, is how to just rephrase these so they can be communicated in this really short form, but it's more clear.
Just to be clear, this in no way, this is in no way meant to say this is the way the action should go to the council at all. It will be the language that is there. This is just to high level right now for us to kind of look across. Are there things across these that could be combined, or is there again a general message from these that we want to relay to the Climate Council? Certainly the detail of the actions, the way they were written, need to go forward. This would never go forward to the council. It's just a matter of us looking at it across, rather than being able to look at 15. I can, we're going to take a break and I can put those 15 actions together, but I'm not sure it'll serve us any better either. So
I agree. And Ben Rose and I had a brief conversation, and I think if you look at the makeup of the people in the public health task group, I think what you've got here, and the ones that have been writing this, is you've got 4 doers in here. We're less planners than we are doers. And even though I don't work anywhere full time, and I, for some reason, haven't really retired from this kind of work, yeah, I'm a doer too. And I think what concerns me is when we try to consolidate this into what Ben's saying are these high level things that we're trying to wrap our heads around, is we look at a action or a strategy, and when we're looking to consolidate it and make it high level, then we're kind of trying to squish, oh yeah, and this and this and this and this.
Yeah, it's a difficult task.
Yeah, it's not easy, and I don't know what purpose it really serves.
it's a responsibility of all of us to put together our group's recommendations. And we can certainly rely on our task groups and will, because that's why we split into task groups, because that's where the expertise lies. It's just a matter of all of us being comfortable with what's going up and feeling like we really captured what this subcommittee holds as important to bring to the council, because this new plan is going to be different from the initial plan, and it's going to call out prioritized actions. Recognizing that might be what a lot of people look at. So what are those really critical things that we want this climate action plan to capture? All these things will be included in the tables and in the narrative, but they won't all be included in the sort of priority actions of the council for this climate action plan. So just want to make sure that we all have an equal opportunity to weigh in on that and feel comfortable with what's going to the council. Go ahead, Anne.
I'm struggling with how to integrate health equity and IDing vulnerable individuals. In a way, IDing vulnerable individuals would have to be done to achieve health equity. So that one maybe can go away because it's obvious. Education is something completely separate. But back to the health equity wording, it's almost like that word, that phrase needs to be in each one of these 4 bullets. But then again, if some of us don't think the bullets are all that great an idea, maybe we go back to our long lists. And
yeah, I mean,
this is such a no-brainer.
This is just a summary. This is just a summary. Those actions as written, long-term, like long language, however you want to describe it, is what's going to go forward. This is to just provide a platform for others to digest what was provided in the 6 slides that were, presented for each task group, and then say, okay, we said that we thought funding was important. I'm not sure funding is carrying through these themes. Maybe that's something you want to think about when you go write your final language, or, just to provide others an opportunity to weigh in. Health equity could be something that, that's a great comment. The task group should be thinking about that when they go back. Alice brought it up. Maybe it should be incorporated. Maybe it's something that's, included in the narrative more than the specific actions. Maybe it's identified more in a strategy in revised language there. Go ahead, Marianne.
Thanks. Yeah, you're sort of asking for like where there might be particular actions we would have liked to see. And this is totally a reflection just in our own task group. But for Scott and Caroline and others, we didn't end up prioritizing anything into our top 5 or so related to business support, or really reflecting what we heard at the business stakeholder event. And I'm just trying to pull our spreadsheet up now to see if there's an opportunity based on just the summary bullets that Andrea included here to to look at those actions that Scott and Dahlia worked on related to businesses, but would love to hear too from other members of the subcommittee who attended that business stakeholder event, if there was a particular comment or something that resonated with you that you saw reflected in some of the actions that Scott presented on businesses that you think should be prioritized. Because I do think that's a, to Chris's point about sort of populations that have been severely impacted by flooding over the last couple of years, our business community is one of those populations. And we, for whatever reason, they weren't reflected in sort of the scoring that we did yesterday.
Yeah, so we're behind on our schedule right now, and we're late on our public comment, and I don't know if there's anybody here from the public that wants to comment. So I want to open it up for that opportunity now. I think what you just raised, Marianne, is very good conversation and sort of a thing to be thinking about as we move into our next agenda item for overall prioritization from our subcommittee. Are there things that you have heard or you think are missing within your own task groups, or from other task groups that along the way you've thought like, oh yeah, that is really important and I don't see it here, or did they mean this by this? So I think we'll take like maybe a little longer break than we planned, but right now open it up to public comment if there is any. Okay, I don't see anyone, I don't hear anyone. So let's move to a break and take, I don't want to spend too much time, but if we can just put ourselves, take yourself off camera, put yourself on mute, and just come back to this meeting in 15 minutes and maybe, go grab a bite to eat, do whatever you need to do for a few minutes, but come back and then kind of look through this again. And we can have about a half an hour when we come back to think about what else might need to be included or how we want to organize these thoughts to provide to the council next week. Okay, sound good? So let's say 2:15, come back. Thanks, Marion. We'll give it just another minute. Anne just did this and it looked really good, and it does feel good if anybody else wants to participate in a little 7th inning stretch. Okay, since we are recording, let's get started again. I just pasted in the chat again the okay, Val, hi. The prioritization criteria, its impact, cost effectiveness, the co-benefits, equity, and technical feasibility. And so, as I understand it, the only ones that were able to go through that at all was the community capacity and planning task group. And even at that was, I think, sort of a high level review of that. And so I just wanted to put that in there because it's certainly along with the, well, the equity is in there. So, but there's a lot more to the equity. There's a lot more to all of these, given the guidance that was provided. But we need to be thinking about that, especially since many of us didn't get the chance to actually go through the exercise of doing that at this point. We need to be thinking about that when we're looking across the board at our prioritization. Are we sort of just doing a gut check? And when we look back at those lists, and we can bring them up if people want to look at them again, you can bring up the abbreviated list. I don't have anything that shows all of them together. So I can't bring them up in full length. But sort of doing a gut check with ourselves. Are these feasible? Is the way that they're written make it feasible? Should they be revised? Are they, are they long-term? Are they near-term? How does that play into whether or not they should be prioritized? And, all of those criteria. What is the impact? What are the co-benefits? Those that have co-benefits, great. Are there ones across each of these that are sort of the same and should be lifted up as a theme? Whose role is it to implement these things? That plays into the feasibility quite a bit, I think. Yeah, and then just like what messaging do we want to send? So that's what I'd like to spend the next half an hour digging into. And so Scott, go ahead. I think you had your hand up first, and then Mike.
Thanks, Andrea. When I looked through the criteria when we got them the other day, there's a couple of things that struck me right away, and it also relates to my reading of the original cap, the first cap. When I've done this before over the years, in terms of priority criteria. One thing that I've always been constrained by is I had a budget that was limited by a time frame. So 4 years and X number of $1 million that I had to spend. So I needed to get things done, and I couldn't have long-term things in there, things that extended beyond the time frame. So we have a cap that we're talking about for 4 years.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that's in these three task groups, if you look at them, some of them are long-term, some are short-term. And I'm wondering, so under the criteria that we have, the only one that actually addressed time frame was the cost under cost effectiveness, where it had the amount of money that was available over a 10-year period, whether it was significant cost, moderate cost, or low cost. It was the only time frame I could see. And so my concern is, and again, when I read the first cap, it was who's implementing it, what is the time frame for it, what's the reality it's going to get done in 4 years, and what's longer term. And even though it's a priority longer term, is it a priority in the short term, and what do we need to be focused on? And I don't have answers for that. I think it's more of a climate council decision. What do you want to focus on? But I think for us, we need to think about what can we get done in 4 years. And I look at our task group, for example, the way you've listed it here, the first one is tools and guides. That Marion and her team are already working on. The second one is long-term funding. Third is funding and technical assistance. The fourth one is increase in funding and financing. The last one is increased funding. Those are all long-term things. And I think we need to be also a little bit realistic. I heard this morning on Vermont Public that ANR's budget is, there's a large percentage of ANR's budget that comes from federal funding. And we can't be guaranteed in the next 4 years we're going to get the same level of federal funding that we get now. So these are things we haven't been talking about. And I do think it has an impact on how we prioritize things.
Sure does. Great points.
Yeah.
A couple of thoughts I have on that, and welcome others to chime in, but I think that's a really good point, that this is a 4-year plan. And so we really should be focusing on things that can gain traction at the very minimum in 4 years. And then maybe the way we're writing things, we need to be, whether it's in these actions or otherwise, make a cue to those that will be writing this, that these things need to be considered, or we need to break these actions up even further into tangible steps to get towards that long-term goal. I think that's a really great point. Thank you.
All right, if I could just say one more thing. So for me, RPCs are critical to us at the municipal level, what the services they provide. And part of it is, as a planning commission, I don't know everything they provide, but I've heard through our staff at the city here of things they're getting from the RPCs. So increased funding is great, but maybe it's more important for us to understand what services do we actually have now and what services don't we have that need to be funded, and try to focus some of these actions more towards what do we get now that we're not getting with existing resources, and what do we need to expand those resources.
Great, thanks. Mike, you disappeared from my screen, but do you still have your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, Scott hit a lot of what I was going to say, and the other comment I had was just that criteria, the impact, cost effectiveness, that to me speaks a lot to when you're actually implementing things. And a lot of what we have on the board here is create planning, create a tool, you know what I mean? So it almost is like what we've come up with almost doesn't match what the criteria was meant to measure. And that might be just how I'm seeing it, but just wanted to mention that.
I think that's an excellent point too. And I'd love to hear from others on that. And I feel like I've heard Marion mention that a few times throughout our process here to say, like, we need some actions. These are actions, but we need implementation. We need projects. We need something to measure. You can measure development of plans. I mean, that is something to check a box, but like sort of what comes on the other side of that. Anne, go ahead.
Thanks. I guess just as a little bit of a devil's advocate for the planning side, with being a planner, right? So take it for what it is. Some of these actions we see as very critical to unlocking. Some of the planning work will unlock the doing work. For example, in this investigation of resilience planning, like in the electric regulation world, resilience is a meaningless term. Reliability is a term that's measured, has targets, there's penalties and regulatory framework around it. It's required by statute. Resilience is just it's a word that means very different things to different entities and different people. And to justify an investment based on resilience in a regulatory context requires framing out, what does that mean? What are the targets? What are the metrics? How is it different than reliability? What is the appropriate amount to ask customers to pay for it? What is the amount that people are willing to and able to pay for resilience separated from reliability? These are all things we've been really wrestling with, as Mike knows very well, for the last year plus. And to actually have this framework, this proceeding where all of this is fleshed out and everyone knows what the rules of the road are, will eliminate a lot of friction and gridlock that's happening in this regulatory space right now, and allow for utilities to understand exactly what they need to plan for and do and why, and that certain investments are either required or going to be acceptable or even blessed. So that I think that's just the argument. That's one particular example. I don't know if it works that way in other contexts, but instead of flailing around, you get the plan in place, you get the proceeding in place, you get the requirements in place, and then you unleash a lot of doing. That's kind of how I see it. So I think we need to have a balance of both. And I know at least in the electric space, there's a few things that we didn't put, they maybe didn't even make it onto this list because they were just carryovers. They weren't changed from the last cap. And maybe some of those need to be elevated here in at least infrastructure in the built environment. For example, we had one about deploying the most effective, resilient alternative at the end of life of a useful electric asset. Like that could very easily be elevated here. It just didn't, it got lost in the shuffle of, we're just trying to identify things that are changing between this cap and the last one.
Mm-hmm. Good point. We definitely, I mean, those still could be the priority, depending on what action has taken place, what the status report on those is. And so definitely a good idea to go back and look at those and make sure they didn't just get forgotten about because they've been there for so long. Go ahead, Ben. Yep, mute. You have to unmute.
Yes, I do. Sorry. What Ann just said makes a lot of sense to me. That said, I want to put in a plug for the immediacy and prioritization of community mental health services. I mean, we are the adaptation side of the climate action plan, and part of the adaptation is that it's happening, it's getting worse. We are the frog in the pot. It's getting hotter. People need help. And so in terms of time frame, I think it makes it real for everybody who's involved in allocating resources to acknowledge that there are mental health impacts of what's happening, and we need to adjust them to hold it together.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great. And maybe it says it in the long term and it doesn't just say it here in this abbreviated term, but like identify and provide the resources necessary to address, right? Whether that's funding, whether it's staff capacities, probably a bunch of those things, but good point. And I agree. And that's a new thing, really, that this plan has not contemplated, really. I think what Anne said, if I could just reflect for a second on it too, is sort of that balance and kind of taking a second to look through where we are with these and see if we do have a balance. Certainly our implementation is going to be more effective if there has been sound planning done for it. So it's sort of maybe a subject matter expert thing too, to know, has the planning been done to effectively implement these things? And do we have the right balance in that? So space to comment on that now, or to contemplate further when you get back together with your task groups and refine the language further. Right.
So if I could just say one more thing, I wasn't implying that we eliminate certain things. I'm just saying that we need to think sequentially, or at least think about the integration of all these activities. Obviously, planning is an important part of implementation, but some of the long-term things that we have in here, I think we just need to flag that these may last or not even be implemented beyond the length time frame of the next cap. But the steps to get there are necessary to be able to get to where we want to be. So, I mean, to give you an example, I know people get frustrated when we say we're going to do, for lack of a better term, climate mitigation and resilience plans for municipalities, because we don't have money to implement those plans. But the plans still need to be done.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you get funds for the longer term thing, and how do you write that into the cap so it makes sense?
And a lot of funding sources require a plan, or will score you better if you have a plan. So all the more reason. Any other comments right now on this? Do we feel like overall as a group, we feel this is comprehensive yet pointed enough to bring forward to the council? I think we have some work to do from each task group to refine it a little bit more based on the discussion that's happened today. And I'll be asking for those in a certain time frame, but you know, really just largely, are we okay with these recommendations going forward? Because we really need to decide that today. We'll have a little bit of time to ponder that further, but our meeting is on Friday. Unless we can miraculously move that meeting up in the week next week, which I think would be very difficult to do, we kind of have to have this ironed out and put the trust into the task groups to land it. But Caroline, go ahead.
What do we do in situations where there seems to be, you know, well, a lot of the action or the priorities have a lot of commonalities in them, like capacity and funding, but some of them are very, very specifically overlapping, like that two of that different task group actions had the MVI mentioned, and then two of them had resilience hubs mentioned. So in those cases, do we want to sit down and try to combine the actions with, is there value in that, or is there more value in it being mentioned multiple times?
It's a really good question. We talked about this a little bit yesterday at cross sector as well, because there was overlapping strategies amongst task groups. I think that's for us to decide ultimately how we want to present that. I see, and again, I feel like it depends on how the final draft comes out, like what people decide, which direction to go in, like how is this going to feed up into the overall plan. So if we just did combine those and say, here's a bullet, and then here's a little paragraph of why this is important, then we have the opportunity to sort of spell that bullet out for both areas. So I guess we need to do some thinking on how that is presented. Mike, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I think the task groups do have a little more work to do before we turn this in, because to Ann's point, this wasn't necessarily our top priorities, right? These were the ones that we had changes to over the last week. At least I don't think these were our top priorities. So I do think the task groups may have a little more work to do.
I mean, I think this is supposed to be the top priorities, but yes, there's room for that. Very little room, but there's room for that to just refine what the priorities are. And there's a fair amount of work to do next week on this, and we can spend some time soon transitioning to that. Because we have to.
So my comment there would be, you know, living with climate change as I do with what I do for a living, I just wouldn't prioritize the control of renewables, which we're already doing and bringing on renewables every day, over trying to make the infrastructure stronger, right? Like, to me, that's the immediate, and we're already bringing on renewables. So that's what I mean. And not all of us have to agree either, right? But that would be my opinion on that.
Okay, good. Thank you. Marian?
Yeah, I think at least for our task group, we, as Scott said, went through sort of an exercise to do some preliminary prioritization. So feel pretty comfortable, at least with that, with those moving forward. That being said, I do, and can email the task group about this, but do want to kind of check in on whether or not we feel that one of the actions kind of related to direct support for businesses needs to be included. Again, just noting that as a gap. But I was thinking about Caroline's comment too, around whether or not we want to look at combining actions that both refer to the MVI or resilience hubs. I think the way that I was thinking about it with the MVI in particular was one of them is really recommending a change or sort of building off the MVI to essentially develop a new tool. And then the other action was, I think, prioritizing funding based on the results of that new tool. I think those are two very different things. One of which would be implemented by one stakeholder, one particular partner, and the other which would be implemented by somebody else. And so to combine them, I think you would lose the level of specificity that makes an action. I can't remember the two for resilience hubs, but I think one of them was about sort of defining and figuring out what resilience hubs are, and the other was equipping them with renewable energy to support, you know, their development and use the shelters or emergency shelters, I think, and those feel like two separate things. So I think maybe there's some discussion between the task groups, but I think looking at really what is the aim of the action and the use of the tool, because I think in that case for the MVI, I feel like they need to be separate actions.
Yeah, and maybe that's just the route we go right now. You know, we have to do our templates and fill those out, and it will include implementers and different things at some point. I'm not sure which point. But maybe that is the time where if there's really commonalities, then they could be combined. Go ahead, Scott. Scott. Val, you want to go ahead?
Sure, just quickly, in terms of, are these the top 5? The IBE task group just needs to take a look at the prioritized actions that came in from Neil this morning and see if any of them rise to the level of importance that we should include them in the top 5. So just a note.
Yeah, definitely. Scott?
This has been very good. It's stimulating some brain cells in my head. I want to go back to Caroline's comment too about the MBI, and I'd love to get Marian's perspective on this. But one of the things that we've highlighted in a couple of these task groups is the need to prioritize those communities that are most vulnerable. And I'm wondering if there's something across all the task groups that would potentially use a tool like MVI to focus some of the program interventions, not necessarily for everything, but maybe there's some opportunities to, like, for example, we were talking about housing that is in infrastructure ready communities, or in housing that's not within floodplains or disaster prone areas. So I'm just something maybe for each task group to think about is what the interconnectivity is between the various activities in the task groups.
Yes, interconnectivity. Totally reminds me, Scott, of that other pathway that was interconnected with the cross-sector mitigation, and where we stand on that, because there was a presentation on those yesterday, and there was definitely some talk, Michael, with Liz Miller about resilience. That came up yesterday, and she said she was going to reach out to you to understand what was being put forward in our group here. But there is interconnectedness amongst our own groups and amongst others. So it's a good point, and it's a lot to think about. Maybe that's one of those like remaining items for beyond what we're presenting to the council that still needs to be worked out. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I just think there needs to be I think of even V-Trans, Andrea, where you said, well, we're already doing those programs. It doesn't mean it's not incredibly important, right? And that is some of the real world stuff we're facing today in the transportation side, in the energy sector, in communication sector. And that's all. I just don't want to lose sight of how important that is, because, when I think about when Chris Campney said, tell me about stories that we've heard from people. I mean, we've had line crews pulling customers out of houses while they're out there trying to get the power back on because the house was about to be washed away. So this is the stuff we're dealing with right now. So I just want to add some urgency back into it. That's all. And I don't want to lose those bullets, even though there's some funding for them. I don't want to lose them. That's all. And I realize that I probably could have brought this up before today, but there's just a lot of meetings and yeah.
There sure is. Thank you. I think this great discussion that we're having today. It's very valuable and useful as we think about how we want to talk about this to the council. Go ahead, Alice.
Yeah. As I listened to presentations this morning from community capacity and planning and infrastructure and built environment, which I thought were very, very complete and well thought out, I found myself in a lot of ways going, oh, yeah. I remember being in that meeting, maybe from Vermont Emergency Management. Oh, yeah, I remember being in that meeting, maybe from a municipal emergency engineer, from a municipal emergency manager. Or maybe I heard it when I was talking about floodplains and building in floodplains. And I started wondering if a couple of things, like there's got to be places there that are now recording, like where there might be, like one of the things I was listening to in this webinar that I told everybody about is there were two pathways. One was understanding and planning and dealing with known events, like things that we know about. And the other one was looking at, well, let's explore and think about what could happen and are there vulnerabilities we're overlooking. And I think there's going to be a lot of gleaning of that information, especially in Vermont when the new FEMA flood mapping comes out. I've been working with new FEMA flood maps and new FEMA 3D maps lately on a kind of a when you get to see them type basis. And the information there really can help people record where vulnerabilities are. And it just seems that whenever and when I talk about and think about public health, I mean, there are agencies and resources out there that know where vulnerable people are and are there to reach out to them. And, read some of the stories that just happened and the 3 deaths that have occurred in encampments here. One was in Berlin and 2 were down in Townsend. There are agencies that are aware of it, so I wonder if we should sort of look around maybe and make sure we're not duplicating efforts, and maybe that there's information we can get from resources already collecting this. Just the thought, there's just something was going around in my head as I was
No, I think those are great thoughts. I think we're constrained significantly by time. Yeah, and there's so much that could go into this, right? Yeah, those are great points. I don't know, like I said, I think there's been a lot of good discussion. I think it's very helpful for moving forward in our task groups and moving forward as a subcommittee and our presentation of all of this to the council. So I appreciate that today. Otis, I think you can take, well, maybe let's go to the next slide. There is, I don't know what the next slide is at this point. Okay, and then this is just transitioning because we only have 15 minutes left to what we need to do over the next week. We have another meeting, like I said, on next Friday. So largely that's going to have to be a presentation for awareness to let you all know this is what's been put forward as a presentation and as the templates that are going to the council. And in order to do that, we need to complete the task group templates. And I would really think, I actually think those should probably, I put Wednesday here. I really think those should be done. Well, let's call it Wednesday. I think we need to share those out with each other for Friday's meeting. So I think Wednesday is a good time frame for that. And then we have to do a PowerPoint, and I will share that PowerPoint on Friday with you all in at least a draft form that I intend to submit to the Climate Council for presentation on Monday. So I think each task group needs to have another meeting. And I know it will probably be miraculous if you can get a meeting with your task groups on Monday or Tuesday, the very latest, to iron out these prioritizations and to understand what needs to be done to complete the templates by Wednesday. I think there's going to be some information that I need, and I'll kind of regroup on what we heard today in order to get the presentation together. And then, yeah, then it's the presentation on Monday, December 16th. So I bet there's questions on exactly what completing the templates means. So I hope that Liz is still here and can help to provide some expectations around that. And then, you know, it might be a little different per task group if we meet those expectations or not, but it would be good to know what the expectations are for completing the templates, Liz, if you're still on.
Yeah, I'm here. Well, I think this slide with the timeline is great and really great to see all of your work today. The templates really just they need to be, I guess the point of the template is that they're in a format that's kind of the same across subcommittees and task groups across the line. So if there's been other Word documents, PowerPoints where you've kind of been fleshing this out in terms of your recommendations, it's just making sure that it's all moved over to the template format, which has kind of like those preset pathway strategy actions within the format of the Excel, the space for the revision, and then prioritization only. Those prioritization columns and guidance are for those new recommendations. So that's kind of like the outline of what's expected with the template. Scott, I see your hand.
Sorry, I'm not sure which template we're talking about.
The Excel template that is broken out by task group. It's kind of what was sent
distributed to the task groups originally, in terms of here's, broken out by task group, here are the pathway strategies and actions in Excel format. So that's what I mean by template.
So I just tried to put those in the chat, and I don't know if I did because I got a little red caution
Yeah, I'm
sign.
happy to send them.
I just want you to know when I tried to do it, it said it's not going to work because you have restricted access or something like that.
There was a new SharePoint, so there's a new link that I
got
shared
the
with
new
you.
links.
Yeah, but I'll put those into the chat as well.
Scott, I've got an email being drafted now to try to help out, and because I know this came through in several different emails. I think you, like I said, you and community capacity and planning are a little bit ahead of the curve on this, but as far as applying the criteria, but we all need to get it into these templates. And Liz, if you can, I can try to open one of them. Let me see what happens when I try.
Just really quick, Scott, I think the template they're referring to is the Excel spreadsheet we've been using. It's not a different sheet. It's that same spreadsheet.
There's new links though, so I'm just
not the one that Bronwyn did, but the original one.
I think the one Bronwyn did is the same, isn't it?
Well, the one. Sorry, this is a detail we can work out, but
yeah, we can figure it out.
It's just I want to make sure we're using the right one. That's all.
So I just opened the link that Liz sent. I didn't share it, did it? This is the link that Liz sent, and this is what is in that link for community capacity and planning.
Yep, that's the one that's in SharePoint. All right.
So it is large.
Yeah.
It has a lot of columns. I have no idea if these are updated or where things stand, or at what point this became the link, because we've been working off something different because people didn't have access to this. So we'll have to reconcile that. But as far as, okay, this doesn't have the criteria in it, right? It just has, this is what was, this is the proposed. I mean, this is the big one, right?
Yeah, so actually, that's a question I have for Liz, because when you sent out the criteria for folks to use, it was just the table in a separate Excel spreadsheet. So are you looking for us to like add a column to this or columns plural with the criteria?
I swear I saw that in one of your emails that it said these should be included in the template, and I don't see that in the template. So how do we do that?
Yeah, so it's copying and pasting those columns into the template.
Okay, I mean, if this is supposed to mirror what's in the climate action plan now as appendices, where it has all that like really written out, like this is the implementer, this is the equity considerations, this is the cost effectiveness like
it doesn't intend to mirror that. That's in the Rural Resilience All, where you could find that information. And this is a cleaner version.
So this is the spreadsheet that I'm sharing right now.
This is the spreadsheet, and then you copy and paste those prioritization 4 columns into the spreadsheet.
Okay.
Again, you're only doing that for new recommendations, not for the ones that already existed because they've gone through that process.
Okay, I mean, I guess maybe we can look at that for revised, because I don't know that we have in our task group any purely new recommendations. They're all sort of revised in some fashion. So maybe this is going to be a big copy and paste. I don't know. It feels like a lot to me too, Scott.
No, I just want to make sure we're all working. I want to make sure we're working off the same platform, and we're all critically aware of what we need to do given the timeline. Marion, you were gonna say we've already done that in a spreadsheet for the prioritization? Is that
Yeah,
what
and
you
we,
mean?
just for Liz's information, we did it just for all of our actions because we didn't have that many. And yeah, we should touch base because if you're not looking for folks to do it with existing actions, the criteria, the rankings for each of the criteria categories, I don't know where you're gonna ask them to get that from.
That's
With the overall
Wasn't that-
rankings, but not each of the individual.
Yeah, maybe let's touch base. I'm just not entirely sure what you mean. We did send out those
Yeah.
criteria definitions to rank them, but maybe that's a separate than what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know, Scott, if your hand's just hanging up there, but
Oh, no,
I
it's just
guess-
hanging there, sorry.
okay. I mean, I guess what we're gonna do is click the link that you provided to us for our template and copy all the work that we've done in our separate one into that. Yeah, thank you. And add those columns. I guess in those columns, is it supposed to only just be like high, like the end result and not the considerations that went into it? Like, how did you guys do it?
How did you
for-
guys do it? Because I think in those columns we just put high, medium, low. But I'm not sure if Marion added more than that.
Community capacity and planning, did you provide any narrative around that, or just
No,
like, this is
just-
medium, this is high, this is low, this is whatever? I don't know what the, yes,
No,
no.
we just did high, medium, low. As Scott said, it was sort of an subjective activity. We did not write out any narrative for it.
Okay.
So it was just we each, and I can share it out or Scott can share out the spreadsheet. Scott essentially took each of the columns, included a row for each of our task group members. We each ranked, and then he did some scoring at the end to get those overall numbers.
Yeah.
And
But it was just high, medium, low. We
Yeah.
didn't write any tasks, like text with it.
we need a public health tab.
What's that, Alice?
I'm not seeing a public health tab there.
Then the third I sent out in the chat, there's a third link that's under public health.
Yeah.
Well,
Are you not seeing it, Alice?
I'm looking, hang on.
I'm stuck in chat purgatory
All
here
right,
because I
I
can't
see it.
publish what I've got in there.
So this is the one we should be using.
Right.
Okay, I tend to open this and never close it, so it's there to work in next week.
Caroline, go ahead. We got a couple minutes
In
here.
terms of high, medium, and low, and defining those, is that something separate that you're talking about from the prioritization framework? Because I thought that's what we were using, the language.
Yep, there's definitions, there's a guidance document, there's a framework, and there's a table that has been provided. Really, just the columns that are in the table that was provided need to be transferred to these links, these tables, and populated as a task group. Task groups can decide if that's done individually and then somehow
Well,
averaged
if we-
out, or
Marion and Carolyn, we're gonna have to, we'll have to decide how to aggregate individual high, medium, lows.
if you got 3 highs and 2 lows, go with the medium. Yeah,
We'll have to figure that one out.
yeah, that's I mean, each task group can figure out how to get that, but those tables need to be complete by Wednesday so we can share them back out with the rest of the subcommittee and have a complete package. Does that seem doable? That's what that's the deliverable to the Climate Council on Friday.
It's
Along with
doable
the
if,
power.
it's doable if we don't make any revisions to what we proposed today, what we presented today. If we have to make changes to any of the actions or priorities, and look, for example, the business thing, Marianne, if we want to make changes to that, we're going to have to do some extra work. Just putting the numbers into the spreadsheet and making sure all the comments are in there appropriately, that's just a couple hours of work.
Yeah, I wasn't proposing making changes to that action. I was just proposing bumping the scoring up so that it becomes a top priority. So anyway, we can talk about it.
Well, we'll do this by email or offline.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Any other questions for next week? All right. And I had a fun little graphic on the PowerPoint, but it's down now. We're close, you guys. We're close to the end. We're not at the end, but we're close, at least for this phase. And then, you know, I'm sure past this post December 16th Climate Council meeting, we'll have a little bit more of a sense of what remains for this subcommittee or not. One more time, Otis. Oh, didn't work. We're not at the end. The end is near, but
oh wait, I gotta go forward. Right? There we go. Now we got it.
There you go. Ta-da. So reach out. I will try to send out another email to the task leads just to kind of try to put a bow on the next steps. And then that'll be it. We'll present this and call it good for now. Thank you so much for everybody, all the work and all the hours. It's been a lot of hours on this, and we'll see each other next week. Go from there. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye all.